Hello, everyone. Our webinar. Our presenter getting on with us. Thank you, ladies. Just wanted to say happy Wednesday to everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Gabriella. I'm one of the legal advocates here at Laura's house. Today, we have a big topic to talk about. And before we do that, I want to go over some housekeeping rules. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat box, or we're also streaming on Facebook Live, so please enter them there, and we'll try to get those all answered for you at the end of our webinar. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and go over the topics for today. So we're going to be discussing what is Title IX, what does advocacy look like in college campuses, how have victims and survivors services changed on campuses to accommodate students during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you, everybody, again. I just want to start off by first giving some definitions that may help us through this webinar. I got all these definitions from the UCI Care's office website. The first definition I'm going to be providing is what is domestic violence. Domestic violence is similar to dating violence, with the exception that the crime is committed against an adult or a minor who is a spouse or former spouse, cohabitant or former cohabitant, or someone with whom the abuser has a child, has an existing dating or engagement relationship, or has had a former dating or engagement relationship. Sexual assault. Sexual assault is an umbrella term that includes physical acts of sexual nature that take place without a person's consent. Sexual assault includes touching, penetration by an object, and sexual intercourse. Stalking. Stalking is unwanted pursuit, following, or harassment. Two common features of stalking are that the actions are not wanted and they threaten or cause fear. And the last one I'm going to go ahead and give definition for is consent. Consent is positive cooperation involving an act of free will, absent of coercion, intimidation, force, or the threat of force. Thank you for letting me provide you those definitions. I'm now going to introduce our presenters. The first presenter that we have the privilege of speaking to is Magdalena Diaz from Cal State University of Fullerton. A little bio and a backstory about Magdalena. She currently serves as the Title IX case manager at Cal State University of Fullerton. She has worked in student affairs since 2017. In her role, she has provided trauma-informed response to issues of sexual assault, dating, domestic violence, and stalking throughout campus community. Previously, she worked as the campus confidential advocate. Magdalena also served as the legal department manager at a domestic violence agency center in Orange County. During that time, she co-developed the Courthouse Advocacy Project, which now serves nearly 1,800 domestic violence survivors each year in Orange County. She is certified in mental health, recovery, and trauma-informed care, and is also a certified restorative justice facilitator. Magdalena is our first-generation professional who received her BA in psychology from California State University of Long Beach, and is currently working on her MA in education with a concentration in counseling at San Diego State University. Welcome, Magdalena.
Thank you.
Next, I'm also going to do a biography for our second presenter from UCI, Rasta Bakiri. Rasta is a UCI Care Advocate. She received her BA in psychology with a minor in social work from San Diego State University and her master's in social work from Boston College. She has been working with survivors of interpersonal violence since 2009. Her experience includes working with survivors of human trafficking with an emphasis on domestic sex trafficking, with survivors of intimate partner violence. She has supported survivors in community-based settings as well as through the criminal legal system. She has a passion for working alongside people who have experienced trauma and is particularly interested in how restorative justice and transformative justice practices might be applied to addressing sexual and domestic violence. Welcome, Rasta.
Thank you.
After the bio, we're going to go ahead and get started into the webinar. Magdalena, I'm going to be speaking to you first and just welcoming you. We really want to know, we have so much important information to go over during this webinar, so we're going to go ahead and start it with a definition of what is Title IX.
Thank you. So I'm going to give two different information in regards to Title IX. So Title IX, just in general, is a federal law that states that any school that receives federal funding must ensure that everyone on their campus is free of gender-based violence. Then how each campus implements the Title IX regulation really varies. I work at Cal State Fullerton, and within Cal State Fullerton, we have our executive orders, and those apply to all 23 CSUs. We have Executive Order 1095 to 1098. And these give definition of what domestic violence is, what sexual misconduct is, what stalking is, what gender-based discrimination is, the process to address these issues. Under Title IX, individuals are also protected from retaliation. More specifically, the campuses have to ensure that they have a notice of discrimination accessible to the campus community. This has to be widely distributed, easily accessible, and available to all campus community. They also have to have a designated individual to address issues related to Title IX. They must respond promptly to any allegations of sexual or gender-based violence. And then they also have to have a process to respond and address these issues. The Cal State also has to provide a copy of the executive orders and a victim bills of rights for any student impacted by these issues. So again, Title IX in itself is just a federal law, and how it's implemented on every campus really varies. There are specific things that they must follow to be in compliance. Within the CSU, we are in compliance through our executive orders.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you bring up a great point, is that our main focus is your school, your campus. And so that leads me to the next question, is who is protected under Title IX?
So again, under Title IX, it just says that anyone that is on campus, regardless of gender identity, sexual expression, specifically for the CSU, it's students, employees, and third parties. Those people would be protected under executive orders. 1095 just gives an overview. Executive Order 1096 is specifically for students, and then 1097 for employees.
And then I know there are some new regulations starting in August. Can you briefly just discuss those and kind of what the impact those will have?
Yes. So, and I'll speak on this briefly because even though we're expected that these will come into effect August 14, it's not for sure yet. So again, I don't want to give information that might not be applicable at the moment, but there are new regulations that make some changes to our policies. There's some things that would impact specifically individuals impacted by dating domestic violence. So I'll speak on those. One of the things that could possibly change with the new regulations is that now campuses would have live hearings. At the moment in California, there's only specific cases that are applicable for a live hearing. If the new regulations go into effect, then it would be the umbrella of who would have to have a live hearing would then be broad, and it could include dating domestic violence. Something else that could change is at the moment we do have a time frame to respond to the cases, or if we're going into an investigation, there's a deadline or a timeline. With the new regulations, there wouldn't really be a timeline. It would just be as prompt as possible. Another one of the changes that could possibly come is that in live hearings, there is some cross-examination at the moment, but it's usually done through a hearing officer, which is a person that's overseeing the hearing. With the new regulations, it's possible that now there could be cross-examination through the advisor, through the complainant and respondent advisor. So just to give some context, through our process, through the Title IX process, the complainant would be the victim or survivor. The respondent would be the person that has been accused of perpetrating violence. So those are some of the changes that could happen. It's still not, again, they should be coming into effect August 14, but there are some things happening in the court system that could put a pause or prolong that when those will come into effect.
Yeah, and definitely considering just COVID-19, and I want to thank you for briefly discussing those as well. And you may have mentioned this, but just again, how does Title IX support an individual who is a victim of abuse?
The role of Title IX is to ensure safety for the campus community, but also to be equitable. So we do try to be equitable in providing services for both the complainant or the person that alleges a victimization, and also to the person accused of perpetrating violence. So obviously is responding in a promptly manner, due process. If there is going to be some kind of sanction, there has to be a process for us to first investigate the allegations to ensure that both students are protected. Specifically for survivors, there is advocacy provided by the campus. For respondents, we also provide respondent advisors, which is someone that can help navigate the process. We also can do interim measures. And interim measures can be assistance in housing if the individuals live in on campus, if they work, employment measures, accommodations, if they're impacted academically, which more than likely they might be. We can also address any academic issues they might have and try to accommodate. And then we also can provide no contact orders. So it's an array of services that we can provide, always ensuring that both parties know their rights and know what they have access on campus.
Yeah, that's great. There's so much that's being provided, on your campus. And that kind of leads me into the next question is the investigation process. So can an individual file an investigation under Title IX? If so, what does that look like, that process?
Yeah, so before we go into the investigation, I want to give some context because there is a misconception in regards to what the Title IX, specifically my office, Title IX and Gender Equity Office, does and how we address these issues. So in order for us to be in compliance of Title IX regulations, our employees are considered responsible employees, meaning if you're an employee of the university and someone discloses to you that they are experiencing the gender-based violence, you're required to report with some exceptions being like victim advocates, counselors, doctors. But just because a report is made to the Title IX office, it doesn't necessarily mean that there will be a response, which is a huge misconception. A lot of times students assume that once we receive a report, that then they have to act. The students always have a choice if they do want to participate or not. If the student does want to participate or the individual wants to participate, the first step is to have a meeting, typically with our Title IX coordinator or myself, the Title IX case manager, where we go into more details about what has occurred. We discuss our definitions, just similar to victimization when you're working in the legal system or with restraining orders. There's specific definitions that must be met in order for it to be considered a violation, right? So we have a conversation about what those definitions look like, and then we go over options. One of the options survivors have is to do nothing. A lot of times they might not want it to be addressed, and that's okay. Typically that can be respected with exceptions. If again, the university has to ensure that it's a safe space for everyone. So if there's a danger to the campus community, that's when sometimes the university still has to act. But the victim or complainant is never required to, or like forced to participate if they don't want to. They sometimes just need interim measures, right? Like a no contact order, or they might just need to be able to access counseling, things like that. We're either the Title IX office, or we will do a referral to our campus advocate to provide those services. If they wanted other options, sometimes we would have to either do what we call informal resolution or an early resolution. Again, talking legal and restraining orders, like mediation. Parties don't have to be in the same room, but we kind of try to address what is the need of that complainant. And then we present it to the respondent, because again, due process, we can't enforce certain things without first either having a finding or the respondent agreeing. So we can do what we call early resolutions, where we would hear from the complainant and see what their needs are. Then we would meet with the respondent separately and bring up what the allegations are, and if we can reach an agreement, we can enter into a resolution that's signed by both parties and the university. Sometimes it can be addressed that way. In other instances, a complainant might choose to go through a formal investigation. And that's when there's an actual investigator assigned to the case. The investigator will do a process, a meeting with all parties, and then there will be a finding of either responsibility of violating our policies or no finding. That process can be about a 90-day working days. And again, there's this exceptions. If it's the other thing that I wanted to add is in California, we do have live hearings for certain cases, and that could be applicable to dating or domestic violence cases if there's also allegations of sexual violence. So if someone chooses a investigation and there's any allegations of sexual violence where the respondent is a student, where the credibility is going to be really a defining factor, and also where if found responsible, sanctions could lead to suspension or expulsion, then at the end of the investigative process, there's also a live hearing that comes into play. But again, we try to address these issues from a trauma-informed lens. So if either party doesn't feel comfortable being in the same room, we can provide them appearing via Zoom. There can be some kind of division between both parties so they can feel both comfortable participating in the live hearing.
Yeah, definitely. And that was a really, a lot in one question. I thank you so much for breaking that down and walking us through, meeting the victim, survivor where they're at, what they're needing at that time and what they're interested in doing, giving them all their options. And as far as protection, we talked about, stay away order as far as going through with the restraining order. What type of protection can a person receive from, getting an order? Yeah.
So there's different types of protection, right? One of them is the CSU can issue what we call a no contact order. Similar, but also different to either a criminal protective order or a domestic violence restraining order. Typically those can only be done if the respondent is affiliated with the campus, either being a student or an employee. Because we have, just like in any criminal or legal procedure, there has to be jurisdiction. So in order for CSU to have jurisdiction, the person has to be affiliated, which again creates sometimes confusion. Someone can make a report to Title IX, but if the respondent is not affiliated in any way, Title IX can still provide some options, usually referred to the advocate, but they're limited in how they can respond. They wouldn't be able to do an investigation per se or an early resolution if the respondent is not affiliated. But if the respondent is affiliated, a no contact order can do, it's similar to a stay away order. But unlike domestic violence restraining orders, they are dual, they are reciprocal. So both parties have to stay away from each other. If either party violates, there could be consequences. And that applies on and off campus. So even if the incident happens off campus, if it violates the no contact order, the Title IX office can then meet with the student and then provide options.
Yeah, that's a new one for me. That both parties, it's reciprocal. Just like for us working with restraining orders and domestic violence, it's one way. It's the moving party requesting against the other. So to know that goes both ways. And is that just asking, a question? Is that like a stay away for no contact, or just no contact if you see each other, no communication?
So it's not a one size fits all. There are situations, especially when there's a finding, where it wouldn't be reciprocal, but when there's no finding, again, because being equitable, we might do a reciprocal. We can modify the order, if both parties have class together, depending on what the complainant is choosing to do. If they don't want to go through an investigation, if they don't want to do an early resolution, again, going back to being equitable, there's still no findings, so we can't prohibit the respondent from having access to education as well. So a no contact order can be a stay away order, but they might be able to still be in the class together. But that could differ, obviously, if there is a finding, in a no contact order might say that person cannot be in the same class. If they both live in housing, again, depending on the case and what resolution the complainant is choosing, we would amend that no contact order. The same thing for employees, but it typically is to stay away, like, no like verbal violence, no intimidation, no harassment, and then staying away from each other. Those are typically the things that we want in a contact order. We can also make accommodations if they are in classes together and things like that to ensure the safety of both parties.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And I know in the beginning we talked about reporting an incident, who is mandated to report incidents, or if they see something. Where is there a time frame as far as when to report an incident or when they can report an incident?
Technically, there's no time frame. Anyone, an individual can report at any time. There's always a catch, things like that, right? Obviously, the sooner you report, the promptly we can respond, and sometimes it's easier to address the situation. Again, you can wait to report it, but if the respondent ends up graduating or ends up leaving employment, again, because of jurisdiction, we might not be able to provide the same options if the respondent is no longer affiliated with the campus. So those are things to consider. Some people might choose to wait, but if the respondent leaves the campus or is no longer affiliated, then it could limit their options.
Yeah, that's a great clarification as well, as far as making that decision on when to report. And if they decide to make the report, what does that process look like? Who do they contact to make that report with?
So there's different options. Obviously, sometimes we get reports to students, sometimes, and I'm again saying student, but this can apply to employees. They might request an accommodation to either a supervisor or to a professor, and then that gets reported to us. Our office, typically myself, will do what we call a CSUF cares, which is just the first contact email. Again, going back to being in compliance, where we give a copy of the executive orders, their bill of rights, and access to resources. Then if the student or employee chooses to meet, we set a meeting where we discuss options. And then depending on what option they choose, they can either do an early resolution or an investigation or nothing, or interim measures just for them. They can also, a lot of times we get reports also through the advocate. A lot of times students will first meet with the advocate, get educated on their options, and then we'll get reports that way as well, or get connected with the complainant that way as well. Or the complainant can choose to make their own report. They can do so by going to our CSUF Title IX and Gender Equity Office. There's actually a form that you can fill out online. So that's one way to report it. I know we will give our contact information. They can also email us their complaint or give us a call, whatever it is that they feel most comfortable with.
Yeah. Definitely, you mentioned that. We can add that to the chat box as well as how to contact them. At the end of our webinar, we're going to be adding that as well for any contact information for both Magdalena and for Rasta. And so my next question you have already answered. You have gone way beyond my questions, and so you've already answered it. But if you may just do us the pleasure of just answering it one more time, the services that Cal State Fullerton provides to victims or survivors of violence.
So again, we can respond to allegations of dating, domestic violence, sexual misconduct, stalking. We can provide no contact orders, interim measures. We can also, the campus also has a campus confidential advocate that is staffed through the Women's and Adult Reentry Center, which I know will also provide that information. And for respondents, also if they are participating in a Title IX process, we do have respondent advisors that can help navigate that process. So those are some of the options they have.
Thank you. And since the pandemic started and we have switched, how have your services changed? What do they look like now? I know you mentioned that you can file a report online through the website. Has anything changed now that during COVID-19?
We understand that these issues are important and they have to be responded in a promptly manner. So again, we've had this process of being able to report online or via email before COVID-19, so people can still do that. They can call, they can work with the advocate, but in regards to meetings, we're obviously having to adapt to COVID-19 and stay-at-home orders in California. So we are providing meetings via Zoom, telephone. So we're still providing the services, just modified online.
Okay, thank you. And so pretty much still that online communication, just no in-person meetings with them. So still providing a good amount of services that you guys did before.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then, you know, there's always tons of emails that we get, you know, throughout this change. Have students or staff gotten notified about Title IX during this time? Have they had communication at all, or any information sent out that you know of?
We don't necessarily just send out information, but you know, we work very closely with other offices to continue informing students of the rights and options. Annually, students, anyone affiliated is required to take a training where this information can be found as well. So we just collaborate with our campus community to ensure that everyone on campus is aware of the rights and options.
Thank you. And I know you said that they're still working with their advocates, you know, over the phone and still getting that information from them. What's happening with pending investigations right now? Are they on hold?
So we are still business as usual, just with the adaptation of being via Zoom or online. Our investigations are still ongoing, and they will continue as far as we're abiding by California stay-at-home orders. We'll continue to address these issues and continue going through investigations.
Okay. And I know we were talking about, you know, the other party and both parties being compliant of an order if there is an order in place. What is done if the other party is non-compliant or any party is non-compliant? Who do they report that to?
Yeah. So again, they have students have options, or the individuals have options. They can work with their advisor or the advocate to kind of process the information, because again, everything has to do with definitions, right? And it has to meet the definition of violating the no contact order, right? And then if they do believe that there's a violation, they could report it to the Title IX and Gender Equity Office, but the individuals that would address the allegations of not following no contact order wouldn't be in the same office. So we have our student contact office that would review those allegations for respondents that are students. And then we have our human resources office that would handle it if it's an employee.
Okay. And they can get that information from the advocate's number that we're going to be providing.
Or they can also reach out to us. Again, even though we might not be looking into allegations of violating a no contact order, or in that case also retaliation, we can still provide them and the appropriate resources to who they can connect to.
Great, that's so great to know as well. I want to thank you for answering all of my questions and going above and beyond here. How can people contact you and your team for services? I know we're going to put that information, but just providing them, you know, that verbal, you know, contact information as well.
Yeah, so again, they can go to our website with the CSUF Title IX and Gender Equity website. They can email Title IX at Fullerton EDU. So those are great ways to get in contact with us.
Thank you so much. And we're going to be providing that information in the chat and also after the end of the webinar. Thank you so much, Magdalena, for everything that you have gone over for us thus far. I'm going to go ahead and be switching over to Rasta. Hi, Rasta. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Okay, so going to go ahead and get started then. Rasta, just to remind everyone, is the UCI Care Advocate, or at least one of them, right?
Yeah, 3 full-time advocates.
Okay, thank you so much. And what is UCI Care?
So UCI Care is a free, confidential, voluntary service that's available to members of the UCI community who have been impacted by power-based violence. So that includes things such as sexual assault, relationship abuse, domestic violence, and stalking. And it's available to all members of the UCI community. So it's not just for students, faculty and staff are also able to access those services.
Okay. And what kind of services, what kind of support services does UCI Care office provide to victims, survivors of violence?
Yeah, so we offer a variety of services. So through our advocacy services, we can provide information regarding their rights and their options. We provide information regarding what reporting might look like, and it will look different whether or not somebody is going to report to, just chooses to report to OEOD or to maybe the police department, right? We also provide things like safety planning. We can provide financial assistance through our Survivor Support Fund. We can help support people in getting accommodations with both housing and academic accommodations. So we provide a variety of support services. We also have a holistic healing program. So we recognize that healing looks different for everybody, so we want to provide different entry points for people. So we have, for example, and right now they're on hold because we're not offering these that specific holistic healing program remotely, but normally we have this program where we can provide, for example, yoga as healing. We have art as healing, music as healing, horticulture as healing. I know a lot of people are, find a lot of solace in tending plants and things like that. So we want to provide people different options, and people can, our services are voluntary. So sometimes people call us once, and whatever it is that they needed, we could sort out with one phone call, and some people choose to work with us longer. So it's really up to them.
Yeah, definitely letting them decide and how to.
Exactly. It's really, we want to be able to give them as many choices as possible. And a big part of that is choosing how they want to access their healing.
Yeah, and that holistic approach is such a great opportunity and, service to them as well. I think even right now we're doing that with yoga and just getting through things. So I think that's a great opportunity as well.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. It's a great program.
Yeah. And these services, are they limited to students? What does that look like as far as who can receive them?
Our services are available to all members of the UCI community. So it's students, faculty, and staff. Okay. So they're available to everybody. Obviously, I think, faculty and staff might have different needs than students, but our services are available to anybody who wants to access them.
Yeah, well, that's great to know as well. And I believe you mentioned it, but we're going over that again. So that's great. No, we can, go through it as long as we're getting that information. I think that's what's most important. And leading to my next question, with an incident that occurs outside of campus, can an individual still seek assistance through the UCI Care office?
Yeah, the Care office works with anybody who's been impacted by these forms of violence. So it doesn't matter where it occurred. It doesn't matter whether or not somebody wants to report or has reported. It doesn't matter when it occurred. So some people experienced violence in childhood or several years before even, becoming part of UCI, and they want to access UCI Care services. So it's available to anybody regardless of who the perpetrator was, where it happened, when it happened, and how they choose to address it in regards to whether or not they choose to report or not.
Okay. Yeah, and if an incident is reported, are charges investigated with or without the consent of the victim? I know we talked about that with Magdalena, so just wanted to see.
So, it depends. The Title IX office does try as much as possible to honor the wishes of the survivor. There are some rare instances where if they feel that there's a safety concern for the campus, that they might go ahead and follow through with an investigation, even if the survivor doesn't want that. But to echo what Magdalena said, the survivors are not required to participate in that, right? So they still have a choice, even though the campus, Title IX office is feels that it's important for them to go through with the investigation. The survivor can choose whether or not they want to participate in that. And then in terms of reporting to the police departments are different, right? So if somebody reports to the police department might feel compelled to continue an investigation and to send a police report over to the district attorney's office, even though a survivor doesn't necessarily want doesn't want criminal legal action.
Yeah.
But it really just depends. But as far as UCI is concerned and the Title IX office, our Title IX office, they do try as much as possible to honor the survivor's wishes regarding that.
Yeah. And I think you even mentioned, a great reminder is that they don't have to be involved if the campus, they decide to move forward with the investigation, they can decide not to be involved, so they still have control and, making that decision for themselves as well.
Exactly. I think it's, it's important to give survivors as much control as possible, over the process. Because we're talking about a situation where they had none and it was taken away from them, right? So we want to give them as much power as we can, as far as the process is concerned.
Yeah. And with continuing to do that, and also, are there any types of accommodations that are given to students to make them feel safe if their abuser is attending the same school or classes?
Yeah, I think it's similar to what Magdalena had touched on. So they can issue no contact stay away orders. And again, like Magdalena said, those are two kind of sided until there's a finding, right? So, but they do have the no contact stay away orders. They can accommodate people by maybe changing class schedules, right? Or changing work hours, depending on who the person is, right? What their relationship with the school is. But they can do those kinds of accommodations. They can do housing accommodations if somebody needs to be relocated. So there are accommodations, and there's campus escorts, right? That can help people maybe walk to their apartment or walk to their car if that's a concern for them as well.
Yeah, and I know escorts are for anyone, to feel safe. And so in respect to the accommodations, are they the same for students that there is no report or investigation in place for, like getting an escort that could be for anyone, but these specific accommodations for safety? Could you answer that one?
Yeah, so there are certain accommodations that would come after a investigation, right? So like Magdalena had touched on, because there's due process, so we can't necessarily engage certain accommodations until there's a finding of responsibility, right? So for example, saying that somebody cannot register for a certain class at a certain time. So it might be difficult to do that, without a finding of responsibility, but you can still help accommodate class schedules and things like that without a report, right? Like at the care office, we can still do housing accommodations. We can reach out to professors and see if maybe somebody can get extra time, right, with an assignment, or can they reschedule an exam for a different time. We can still connect students to the Disability Services Center, and we can do that with all they need to know is that they're a care referral, and they can enact certain accommodations through them as well. So to answer your question, there are certain accommodations that we can roll out without a report, right? And then certain that would require a finding to be able to enact.
Yeah, and thank you for elaborating on that one as well. And I know we mentioned this with Magdalena as far as what is the responsibility of facility members. So what role do they play in addressing an incident, or if they suspect that a student is experiencing abuse?
Right, so there are, the vast majority of employees at UCI are responsible employees, with the exception of the care staff, respondent services staff, the campus ombudsman, and licensed counselors. Everybody else is considered a responsible employee, right? But I think outside of just thinking about that they have a legal responsibility, legal mandate to report, we also want to talk about the fact that the way that somebody engages with a student or faculty or staff who discloses violence to them is going to be really integral, right? It's important. However, that first person response to them is going to really color the remainder of the process and maybe how that person, the survivor, accesses services, right? So we just want to remind people that it's important to listen without judgment. You know, don't promise confidentiality, particularly if you're a responsible employee, right? Let people, don't promise any certain outcomes or anything like that, because we don't know. There's so many variables, right? And let people know if you're a responsible employee and somebody tells you something and you are going to have to report that, let them know that you're going to make that report. Don't, you know, kind of just, you know, and they might not like that. They might not want you to make that report, but at least them knowing that, you know, they can kind of prepare and they can know kind of what's coming down the pike, right? It's also just, yeah, I mean, just listen and, you know, affirm and validate their experience. I think that's really important to keep in mind.
Yeah, and a great reminder as well when we're, you know, being sensitive to listening and, you know, disclosing if we are, you know, mandated reporters or responsible parties. So definitely a great thing to just remind and bring up as well. And I know we had talked about just resources that are out there, you know, maybe during this time of COVID-19, what community resources, what types of resources are there for individuals right now?
So right now, we at the care office are still operating business as usual, like, you know, like you are, Magdalena, at Cal State Fullerton. All of our services are being offered remotely, but we're still offering the same services with the exception of our holistic healing programs, which we will restart once we're back on campus and able to do that. But yeah, so all of this care services are still available. We do Zoom. We have HIPAA compliant Zoom, so we utilize that for doing intakes and meeting with survivors. We can still also offer, you know, accompaniment that way. I forgot to actually mention that earlier. That was one of the services that we provide, which is a really important one actually, where we can do accompaniment to any hearings, accompaniment to forensic exams, accompaniment to any law enforcement, any kind of reporting that they're going to do. If they want us there, we can go to, you know, court accompaniment if they want that.
Yeah, no, that's...
And in terms of the campus resources, the same resources are still available. Again, like they just look a little bit different right now, right? So within the campus community, we have, for example, the counseling center. They're offering telehealth services, right? There's student health services, they're offering telehealth services. Disability services is still available to students. We have also, the Department of Student Life and Leadership has a lot of like identity centers because, you know, a lot of, you know, the people that we serve, they identify maybe with multiple communities and multiple identities. And some of those identities can maybe influence how they even experience their, you know, their trauma and things like that and how they process it and what they would consider to be healing, you know. So there is, for example, the LGBT Resource Center. There's the Dream Center that's available to undocumented and mixed status, undocumented students and students from mixed status families. We have the Vet Center that's available to veterans. We have the Black Student Center, you know, so there's different identity centers on campus as well. There's the Cross-Cultural Center. So there's a lot of different resources available, you know, to students. And obviously there's OEOD if somebody chooses to report. There's the Ombudsman, they're a confidential, you know, resource available to people. So there's a wide variety of campus resources that are still available, even though we are all operating remotely. And then off campus, we have Waymakers that's available. They offer, you know, support services for survivors of sexual assault and victims of all kinds of crime. We have, you know, there's the domestic violence shelters, you know, in the area. So there's you all, there's WTLC, there's Interval House, you know, and so there's a lot of different resources both within the UCI campus community and in the wider community.
Yeah, and thank you for going over those and all of the ones that you guys are still offering, you know, at your campus. I think that's great to mention because right now, you know, we're alone together during COVID-19, and understanding that UCI and Cal State Fullerton both still have those services and those people that are available to speak to and to still receive the same services. They may look different, but we're still, you know, up and going, just as we are here at Laura's house. And to my next question, Rasta, and last and final, is how to contact you. I know you mentioned that there's, you said 3, I believe, advocates at the UCI Care Center. How do we contact if needed?
So there's currently, at least, you know, when we're back on campus, walk-ins are also available. But currently, it's best to call either 949-824-7273. That's our main office for care. And you can get connected through an advocate that way. They can also email care@uci.edu and get connected.
Yeah. Thank you. And Leah has also added that to the chat for anyone who is on here on Zoom. And then we'll also add it to our webinar at the end for both contact information. Thank you so much, Rasta, for answering all of our questions and going in depth on everything you guys are still offering. I really do thank you both. I'm going to go ahead and now open this time up to any questions that anybody may have, whether that be on Facebook or here on Zoom. They'll be entered into the chat, and whether that be for Rasta at UCI or for Magdalena at Cal State Fullerton, we'll take the time now to go ahead and welcome those questions. In the meantime that we wait for those, we do have some questions for both of you that maybe we can chat about in the meantime. And so let me go ahead and grab those for you both. One of the questions that I have here is, what do services look like for victims who live on campus versus victims who live off campus? Whoever wants to start first, I welcome that to either of you.
I can start. So again, we have these new Title IX regulations pending. One of the changes that could happen is, at the moment, Title IX will address these issues as long as the respondent is affiliated with the campus. Title IX can then respond and try to address the situation. There's a possibility that that could change with new regulations, meaning that if the incident didn't occur on our campus, if it occurred overseas, that could change, right? But at the moment, we address it regardless of where the incident occurred, as long as the respondent is affiliated with the campus and it occurred while they were affiliated, right? And the only difference, I would say, when we respond, I mean, I think Rasta kind of discussed this earlier. You know, if someone is living with someone in our housing on campus, that's something that the university has jurisdiction over. Title IX has jurisdiction. We can make accommodations. Now, if they live off campus, even sometimes, I know UCI has this, Cal State Fullerton has this, we have apartments that are like literally across from us, right? And they might have names that make you feel like, oh, they might be affiliated. We are not connected with them. So we wouldn't be able to make accommodations for any off-campus housing, right? Similar to employment, if the allegations are connected to employment, if they're an employee of the university, we could try to work and try to arrange a schedule or do safety planning around that. Again, if they're not employees, if their employment isn't on campus, we can't really call their employer and say, this is what you need to do. So there are some limitations in regards to some of the options based on like, what is it that they need? But at the moment, as long as their respondent is affiliated, if it happened on our campus, the university would respond if we received the report and complainant wanted us to.
Thank you.
I think for us at CARE, in terms of CARE, because we can work with people regardless of, you know, who the perpetrator was and what the exact circumstances of the situation was, it doesn't really impact who we're able to work with in that way. But I think in terms of whether or not somebody lives off campus or on campus, and Magdalena did touch on this, it just might look a little bit different. So like the safety planning might look a little bit different, you know, and the accommodations necessary might look different, but they would still be allowed to access all the same types of services. It would just be a, you know, case by case basis of what the actual interventions would be and things like that would look a little bit different based on where somebody lived.
Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely want to thank you both for the time that you've taken to answer all of my questions. I know they were, you know, a little lengthy, but I appreciate it. And I think it's such valuable information that we've provided from two really big campuses here in Orange County. So I want to again thank you, and thank you everyone who has joined us. Do you ladies have any last remarks before we kind of go ahead and go give our contact information?
I think I just wanted to give a shout out, if I can have just a second, to give a shout out to our education team as well. We have a prevention arm of CARE as well that has peer educator groups, and they do a lot of work with bystander intervention, and they, you know, do a lot of just educational programming and workshops, and they're still doing all of that even remotely. We did Take Back the Night all virtual and remotely. We did Denim Day remotely, and they are still doing a lot of good educational programming through the same remote services that a lot of people are utilizing, and still working on getting the message out there of how to do bystander intervention, even while we're all sheltering in place, you know, and taking all those things into account still, you know, that those things haven't gone away, but they are just looking a little bit different.
Yeah, definitely. Maggie, any last remarks?
I want to say thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I think it's so important that we continue educating and giving the information about rights and options for anyone that's impacted by these issues.
Yeah, definitely. Well, another thank you to the both of you ladies, Rasta and Magdalena. That's going to conclude our webinar for today. What we're going to go ahead and switch to do is I'm going to share my screen with contact information for UCI Care and for Cal State Fullerton, the advocacy department, and also the Title IX and case management. I want to thank everybody. Ladies, if you can please mute and hide video, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.